You'll never know. I married you to save us all, even if you never wake up.
She was forced to marry her sister's millionaire fiancé in a coma. But what happened next will. Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's story, I wanted to quickly ask for a small favor. Would you mind hitting that subscribe button and turning on the notification bell? That way you'll never miss any of the new videos we post. It's quick, it's free, and it's the absolute best way to support us and help us bring you even more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Also, where are you watching from? Go ahead and drop your city or country in the comments below. Thanks so much. Now let's get back to our main character. Rain lashed against the city that night, turning the hospital windows into blurred streaks of silver. The corridors held that familiar faint scent of antiseptic mixed with exhaustion. Anna's footsteps echoed softly as she trailed behind her parents toward the intensive care unit. Her palms were sweaty, her breath came in shallow gasps, and the same thought kept circling in her mind, like a vulture circling its prey. Why me? Why tonight of all nights? Inside the private suite, machines hummed a steady, rhythmic beat. A young man lay perfectly still beneath the crisp, white sheets. His name was Ethan Blackwell, heir to the Blackwell fortune. He'd once been known for commanding boardrooms and dazzling at society galas. Now, he was completely silent, his chest rising and falling only with the help of tubes and machines. He was also her sister's fiancé. Anna's mother nervously adjusted her pearl necklace, her fingers fidgeting. Her father's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching. "You will do this, Anna," he whispered, his tone more like a command than a heartfelt plea. "Our family's reputation, our business, everything depends on it. Your sister can't be found. The press is circling like a pack of wolves. You have to step in." Anna stared at the unconscious man. His hand, strong yet now limp, lay exposed beside the heart monitor. A wedding ring gleamed on the nearby table, waiting for her finger. Her heart pounded against her ribs. "This is utter madness," she thought, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "He's not my fiancé. He's my sister's fiancé." Her father's eyes were cold, unyielding. "He's a Blackwell. That name means power, protection. Without this marriage, we lose everything. Do you want to see your mother thrown out of this hospital because we can't afford the bills? Do you want to see our company seized by creditors?" Her mother's lips quivered, but she nodded in agreement. "It's just a ceremony on paper, darling. Nothing more. Think of it as a contract. Just sign it, and this whole nightmare will be over." Anna's chest tightened, a knot forming in her throat. A contract, that's all it was. A piece of paper binding her to a man who didn't even know she existed in this way. Her sister had been the chosen bride, adored for her elegance, her poise. Anna had always been the shadow, the quiet one, the girl in hand-me-down dresses with a heart full of unspoken dreams. Now, her family wanted her to play a role, to slip into her sister's place like a mask. The chaplain cleared his throat softly, the sound awkward and intrusive in the sterile air. "Shall we begin?" he asked. Anna's pulse roared in her ears, a frantic drumbeat. She looked once more at Ethan's face, pale but still strikingly handsome, framed by dark hair against the white pillow. There was no answer from him. No choice given to her. Only silence. Her father pressed the pen into her hand, his fingers firm and insistent. "Sign, Anna." She hesitated. The ink shimmered on the line, waiting for her name, for her consent. One decision, and everything would change forever. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. She whispered so softly, only she could hear, "I don't belong here." But she signed anyway. The chaplain's words blurred as the ceremony droned on. The vows felt like heavy chains tightening around her throat. When the ring slid onto her finger, Anna's heart plummeted. a stone falling into an abyss. She glanced at Ethan, searching for some flicker of life, some protest. But there was nothing. Only the rhythmic beep of the monitor, indifferent and unyielding. There was no applause. There was no kiss, no celebration. Only her father's satisfied nod and her mother's weary sigh of relief. As the papers were collected, Anna's gaze lingered on the man she had just married. A stranger, a millionaire, a ghost of what he once was. And yet, in the stillness of that room, with the storm raging outside the window, something stirred in her chest, a question she dared not speak aloud. What if he wakes up? And deep down, she knew that if that day ever came, her life would never be the same. The storm raged on that night. Rain hammered against the windows of the Blackwell estate as Anna was driven through the imposing iron gates in the back of a sleek black car. The mansion loomed in the distance like a fortress against the flashing sky. Its towering columns and marble facade spoke of wealth older than memory. But to Anna, it felt less like a home, and more like a gilded prison she had just agreed to enter. The car rolled to a stop beneath a massive stone archway. A butler in a crisp, immaculate uniform opened the door. "Welcome, Mrs. Blackwell," he said with a polite, practiced bow. The title landed on her shoulders like a crushing weight she couldn't lift. She stepped out into the rain and followed him inside. The foyer stretched upward 2 stories, glittering with chandeliers and portraits of solemn, unsmiling ancestors. Every step Anna took echoed across the polished marble floor. She trailed her fingers along the banister, smooth and cold beneath her touch, wondering how she could ever belong in such a place. A housekeeper appeared, carrying her small suitcase. "Your room has been prepared," she said quietly, leading Anna up the sweeping, grand staircase. At the end of a long corridor, double doors opened to reveal a lavish bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, silk curtains, and a king-sized bed. The room was undeniably beautiful, but it felt strangely lifeless, like a stage set waiting for actors who would never arrive. Left alone, Anna moved to the mirror. The reflection staring back at her was unfamiliar, almost alien. A simple girl in a borrowed dress, now wearing the name of one of the most powerful families in the country. She pulled the wedding ring off her finger and set it on the vanity. It glimmered under the soft light, a constant glittering reminder of the vows she'd spoken beside a man who hadn't even heard them. That night, dinner was served in the grand dining hall. A long, imposing oak table stretched the entire length of the room, lined with gleaming silver and sparkling crystal. Anna sat at one end, her parents flanking her on either side. At the far end sat Eleanor Blackwell, Ethan's stepmother, elegant and icy in pearls, her gaze as sharp as shards of glass. "So," Eleanor said, her voice smooth as silk but heavy with a barely veiled judgment, "the ceremony is complete. We welcome you to the family, Anna." "Thank you," Anna replied softly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her father raised his glass. "To the Blackwells and to a future secured." Crystal chimed as the toast echoed through the vast room, but Anna felt no joy, no sense of celebration. She lowered her gaze to the plate of food, untouched before her. Every bite tasted like obligation and fear. After dinner, Eleanor pulled Anna aside into the library. Shelves filled with leather-bound books towered over them, the firelight flickering across Eleanor's face, casting long, dancing shadows. "You understand what is expected of you," Eleanor said, her tone like steel wrapped in silk. "The press must believe you are Ethan's devoted wife. Appearances are everything. You will smile. You will answer their questions. And you will never let them see a single moment of doubt." Anna swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing larger. "And if Ethan never wakes up?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her gaze unwavering. "Then you will continue to play your part until it is no longer necessary. Do not imagine you have choices here, Anna. You have obligations. The words cut deeper than any blade, sharper than any insult. Anna nodded, though inside her heart rebelled with every beat. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear the heavy pearls from Eleanor's throat, but she said nothing. She had already signed her life away. Later that night, Anna slipped into the private hospital wing within the mansion. Ethan lay in a custom suite, surrounded by silent, watchful machines. She pulled a chair beside his bed and sat down, her hands trembling in her lap. "I guess we're married now," she whispered into the quiet. "Strange, isn't it? You never asked me, and I never really agreed. And yet, here we are." The only reply was the steady, monotonous beep of the heart monitor. Anna leaned closer, studying his face. Even in stillness, Ethan carried a certain kind of strength, a shadow of the dynamic man who had once filled headlines. She wondered what he would say if he knew the truth. Would he despise her? Would he see her as a fraud? A thief who had stolen her sister's place? Her eyes burned with unshed tears. She reached out almost without thinking and brushed her fingers against his hand. It was warm, surprisingly warm for someone she thought of as a stranger. "I didn't want this," she confessed. "But maybe you already know that. Maybe somewhere in there you can hear me." For the first time since the ceremony, she let the tears fall freely. She wept silently beside the man who couldn't answer, the man who held her fate in his hands without even knowing it. And as the storm raged beyond the glass, Anna whispered a vow to herself. She would survive this. She would find her strength in the shadow of a marriage built on silence. What she couldn't know as she closed her eyes in exhaustion beside Ethan's bed was that the faintest twitch had moved across his fingers. A spark, a beginning, something no one in that house was ready for. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the heavy curtains of Anna's new room. But she felt no warmth, no joy, only a heavy sense of dread. The mansion had been eerily silent all night, the kind of silence that pressed on her chest until she could hardly breathe. She dressed in a modest blouse and skirt provided by the house staff, and forced herself to face another day of this strange, unfamiliar new life. Downstairs, Eleanor was already waiting in the breakfast room, sipping tea from delicate porcelain. Her eyes flicked up at Anna with cool calculation. "You will need to prepare yourself. The press has been relentless since the accident. They will want to see you beside Ethan. They will want to believe in this marriage." "Oh," Anna hesitated, her fingers tightening around the back of the chair. "But I don't know how to face them. What if I say the wrong thing?" Eleanor's lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. "Then you will learn quickly. Mistakes are not tolerated in this family. Appear graceful. Appear devoted. That is all that matters." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. A stylist trimmed Anna's hair. A wardrobe assistant pressed designer dresses into her arms. And a public relations manager rehearsed her answers to expected questions. Anna felt like a puppet dressed in silk, her strings pulled by invisible hands. By late afternoon, a limousine carried her and Eleanor to the Blackwell Foundation Gala, an annual event where society's most powerful gathered beneath glittering chandeliers. Normally, Ethan would have been the centerpiece of such an event, but now it was Anna who was being forced into the spotlight. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, crystal chandeliers reflecting off the polished floors. Cameras flashed as reporters surged toward her, a sea of faces and flashing lights. Anna's heart raced, her palms damp with fear. Eleanor's hand pressed firmly against her back, a silent warning. "Smile," she whispered. "Remember, you are his wife." Anna raised her chin, her lips trembling as she tried to force them into a practiced smile. The first question came sharp and direct. "Mrs. Blackwell, how is your husband's condition? Do you believe he will recover?" For a heartbeat, Anna froze, her mind blank. The room seemed to tilt around her. The crowd was waiting, expectant. She couldn't rely on the rehearsed lines. They felt hollow and meaningless now. Her throat ached with suppressed emotion. But then, unexpectedly, words poured out from somewhere raw and true, from the depths of her heart. "I sit with him every night," Anna said softly, her voice catching slightly. "I hold his hand, and I talk to him, even though he can't answer. I choose to believe that he hears me. I choose to believe that he will come back because marriage isn't about convenience or appearances. It's about hope. And as long as he breathes, I will not give up hope." The room stilled, the cameras clicking rapidly. For the first time since her forced wedding, Anna's words were her own, not scripted by Eleanor or dictated by fear. When the barrage of questions finally ended, the reporters murmured in approval. Some even applauded. Eleanor's smile was tight, strained, but she said nothing. Anna had passed the first test, and she knew it. Later, when the gala ended and the mansion lights glowed faintly against the night sky, Anna returned to Ethan's private suite. Exhaustion clung to her like a heavy cloak, but she couldn't resist sitting once more at his bedside. "They believed me tonight," she whispered to him, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They believed that I love you. Maybe I'm a liar, or maybe I just wanted to believe it myself." Her eyes drifted to the wedding ring, glinting on her finger. The ring that had once felt like a chain now seemed different, more like a question waiting for an answer. And then, so slight that she almost imagined it, Ethan's hand twitched beneath hers. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer, her heart thundering in her chest. "Ethan?" she whispered. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm, indifferent to her hope. But Anna swore she saw the faintest flicker of movement again. She clutched his hand tighter, tears welling in her eyes. "If you can hear me, please come back." The machines hummed, the night stretched on, and Anna sat there, whispering stories to a man trapped in silence. She didn't know that somewhere deep within his unconsciousness, Ethan was beginning to stir. And when he opened his eyes, nothing in Anna's world would ever be the same. Days bled into nights inside the Blackwell mansion, each one measured by the steady hum of the machines in Ethan's private suite. Anna's world had shrunk to that single room, to the sound of his breathing, to the fragile flicker of hope that ignited each time she thought she felt his hand twitch beneath her fingers. But outside the sanctuary of that room, the weight of expectation grew heavier with each passing day. Eleanor's watchful gaze followed her through the halls like a shadow, a constant reminder of her obligations. Her father's calls pressed her to maintain the illusion, to perpetuate the lie that she was a devoted wife. And the city's newspapers were filled with photographs of her at Ethan's bedside, headlines proclaiming her the devoted young bride who keeps the Blackwell legacy alive. One evening, after a grueling day of forced lessons in etiquette and introductions to board members whose names she could barely remember, Anna slipped once more into Ethan's suite. The scent of antiseptic still lingered in the air, but the room felt different tonight, more alive, charged with an unspoken energy. She set her bag down and pulled a chair close to his bed. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "I'm drowning in a life that doesn't belong to me, but then I come here, and I tell myself that maybe you can hear me, that maybe you know I'm trying. Maybe I'm just a fool." Her hand brushed across his, lingering longer than usual. And then it happened. A faint squeeze. Barely there, almost imperceptible, but real enough to make her heart leap into her throat. She gasped, leaning forward. "Ethan, did you move?" The heart monitor beeped steadily, offering no confirmation, no denial. Yet his fingers curled once more, subtle but undeniable. Anna pressed her free hand to her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. Without thinking, she pressed the call button for the nurses. Nurses rushed into the room, followed closely by Dr. Harris, the Blackwell family physician. He checked the monitors, his expression sharpening as he examined Ethan's vitals. "This is remarkable," Dr. Harris murmured, his voice filled with surprise. "Increased responsiveness, elevated brain activity. He's trying to come back." Eleanor arrived moments later, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She studied Ethan with narrowed eyes, her expression unreadable, then turned to Anna. "What did you do?" "I only spoke to him," Anna stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been speaking to him every night, and just now, he moved. He squeezed my hand." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "We'll see if it continues. Don't get your hopes too high." But Anna couldn't stop the hope from blooming in her chest, a fragile flower pushing through concrete. She spent the rest of the night beside Ethan, whispering stories from her childhood, secrets she had never told anyone. Each time she paused, she swore she saw the faintest twitch of his eyelids, the softest tremor in his hand. The following morning, the news spread quickly through the household, rippling through the Blackwell mansion like a shockwave. Staff whispered in the halls, their voices hushed with excitement. Board members exchanged theories, their faces etched with cautious optimism. And Eleanor grew colder, more watchful, her eyes never leaving Anna's face. But Anna's heart carried a secret fire, a burning ember of hope that refused to be extinguished. She knew something had shifted, that a change was coming. That evening, the moment she stepped back into the suite, Ethan's eyelids fluttered. His lips parted, a faint rasp of air escaping. Anna froze, her breath caught in her throat. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. For the first time since the accident, Ethan Blackwell looked at the world again. His gaze, unfocused at first, slowly landed on Anna. Confusion rippled across his features, but then his hand moved, reaching weakly toward hers. Anna clutched it, tears streaming down her face. "You're awake. You came back." The door burst open as Dr. Harris and the nurses hurried in, their movements brisk and efficient. Machines beeped, monitors lit up with vibrant displays, voices filled the room with urgent orders and assessments. But Anna heard none of it. She only saw Ethan's eyes, hazy but undeniably alive, staring into hers. Eleanor stepped closer, her tone sharp. "Ethan, can you hear me? It's your mother. You're safe now." But Ethan's lips parted, his voice a whisper so faint that Anna had to lean close to catch it. "Who are you?" The room went silent, every gaze turning to Anna, still clutching his hand, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. Because in that fragile, pivotal moment, when Ethan awoke from the silence, he didn't recognize the woman the world believed was his wife. And Anna realized with a jolt of terror that the elaborate illusion she had been forced to uphold was about to shatter into a million pieces. The silence that followed Ethan's question stretched on, seemingly forever. His voice had been weak, his words broken and slurred, but there was no mistaking their meaning. He had looked directly at Anna and asked, "Who are you?" Anna's throat tightened, her lips parted, but no sound escaped. Around them, the medical staff waited with bated breath, their eyes darting nervously between Ethan's pale, gaunt face and the young woman still clutching his hand. Eleanor was the first to break the silence. She stepped forward, her tone sharp but carefully honeyed. "Don't strain yourself, Ethan," she said, her voice soothing. "You've been asleep for a very long time. This confusion is perfectly natural." But Ethan's gaze remained fixed on Anna, a mixture of confusion and bewilderment swimming in his dark eyes. She forced herself to speak, though her voice cracked with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. I'm Anna. The carefully constructed lie she had been living since the night of the ceremony hung heavy in the air between them. It wasn't the full truth, not the heartfelt confession her soul longed to spill, but all she dared to offer with Eleanor standing so close, her eyes like sharp, glittering daggers. Dr. Harris cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence, and gestured for the nurses to adjust the monitors. "We should focus on stabilization for now," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Memory gaps are common after extended comas. Recovery will be a slow and gradual process. Let him rest." Ethan's hand trembled slightly in Anna's. She wanted to squeeze it tighter, to reassure him, to promise him that she wouldn't leave his side. But Eleanor placed a cold, restraining hand on her shoulder. "Enough. Let the doctors handle this. Come." Reluctantly, Anna released his hand and followed Eleanor into the corridor. Her chest ached as though she had left a piece of herself behind in that room. In the hallway, Eleanor's carefully maintained composure cracked just enough to reveal the raw suspicion that simmered beneath the surface. "Remember your role, Anna," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "You are Mrs. Blackwell. Now don't falter in front of him. If he senses doubt, if he asks too many questions, everything we've built will unravel." Anna's pulse quickened, fear lancing through her veins. "He deserves to know the truth." "The truth!" Eleanor hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. "The truth would ruin you, ruin us all. Do you want to see your family destroyed? Do you want him to cast you aside the moment he learns you were never meant to be his bride?" Anna said nothing, her silence a fragile shield against Eleanor's venom, but inside her heart rebelled against the injustice of it all. She couldn't erase the lost, confused look in Ethan's eyes when he had reached for her hand. Confused as he was, there had been something there, a flicker of trust, or at least a recognition of her voice. That night, long after the mansion had settled into its characteristic silence, Anna returned to Ethan's suite. She found him awake, his eyes half-lidded, but searching the ceiling as though he were trying to piece together the fragments of a shattered dream. When he turned his head and saw her standing in the doorway, his lips parted slightly. "Anna," he whispered, his voice strained but certain. "You spoke to me. I heard you in the dark every night." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. She sank into the chair beside him, her legs suddenly weak. "You heard me?" "Yes." His voice was growing steadier. "I thought I was gone, lost forever. But I heard your stories, your laugh. You pulled me back." Her hand trembled as she reached out and took his. For a fleeting moment she forgot the contract, the lies, the watchful eyes of Eleanor and her family. In that fragile space, it was just the two of them, bound not by a piece of paper, but by whispered words in the dark. "I didn't know if it mattered," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I only spoke because I couldn't bear the silence." Ethan's thumb brushed weakly across her palm, a small, reassuring gesture. "It mattered," he said, his voice filled with a profound sense of gratitude. A torrent of emotion surged in Anna's chest, fierce and undeniable. She wanted to tell him everything, that she had been forced into this marriage, that she had never intended to take her sister's place, that her life had become a tangled web of deceit. But before she could speak, the door creaked open. Eleanor entered, her expression unreadable, her eyes scanning the room with sharp intensity. "Time for his rest," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. Anna withdrew her hand quickly, a wave of guilt washing over her. She rose and slipped out of the room, but not before glancing back at Ethan. His eyes followed her, filled with a question that words could not yet convey. As she walked the long, lonely corridor back to her room, Anna's mind raced. He remembered her voice. He had credited her with pulling him back from the brink of oblivion. It was no longer just a contract or a role forced upon her. Something real had begun to grow between them. It was fragile, vulnerable, but also unshakable in its own way. And deep inside, Anna knew that the longer she lived this lie, the harder the truth would strike when it finally came to light. Because Ethan Blackwell was awake now, and sooner or later, he would demand answers. The news of Ethan's awakening spread through the mansion like wildfire. By the following morning, every servant, every board member, and every distant relative knew that the heir to the Blackwell empire had opened his eyes and returned to the world of the living. Doctors came and went, adjusting his treatments, scheduling intensive therapy sessions, and testing his reflexes. For the world outside the walls of the mansion, it was nothing short of a miracle, a testament to modern medicine and the power of hope. But for Anna, it was the beginning of something far more complicated, a tangled web of emotions and obligations that threatened to suffocate her. She sat in his suite, watching him attempt to raise himself in bed. His once powerful frame looked frail and weakened, his muscles atrophied from months of stillness. Sweat dampened his brow as he gritted his teeth, fighting to lift his arm just a few inches. "Easy," Anna said softly, stepping forward to offer assistance. She gently adjusted the pillows behind him, her movements careful and deliberate. Ethan exhaled shakily, his body trembling with exertion. "Everything feels broken," he said, his voice hoarse and strained. "You're not broken," Anna whispered, her voice filled with quiet reassurance. "You're just rebuilding, piece by piece." His eyes met hers, searching, as though he were trying to fit her into the fractured puzzle of his memory. "Why do I feel like I know you? I remember your voice in the darkness. It kept me alive. But I don't remember a wedding. I don't remember you as my wife." His words pierced her heart, sharper than any blade. She had rehearsed countless explanations in her head, but none of them seemed adequate. None of them felt like they could possibly convey the complexity of the situation. "You're not supposed to remember everything right away. That's what the doctors said," she murmured, avoiding his intense gaze. He reached out, his hand trembling but insistent, until it rested over hers. "I may not know the full truth, but I know this. You stayed. You believed in me when no one else did. That matters more than any ceremony." Tears pricked at Anna's eyes, blurring her vision. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that had begun to blossom in her heart. She wanted to tell him everything, to unburden herself of the weight of her secret. She allowed herself to sink into that fragile hope, a dangerous indulgence. But Eleanor's warning, sharp and clear, echoed relentlessly in her mind. If he learns the truth, she thought, everything will collapse. Our carefully constructed world will come crashing down around us. Later that afternoon, Eleanor swept into the room, her high heels clicking against the polished floor with the force of a judge's gavel, each step a pronouncement. She offered a saccharine smile to her stepson, but her eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed her true intentions. "Ethan, darling," she purred, her voice laced with false affection. "The world will be simply overjoyed to see you alive and well. We're already arranging the press conference. Until then, you absolutely must rest. You need to conserve your strength." Ethan's gaze hardened, a spark of defiance flickering in his eyes. "I am tired of rest," he stated firmly, his voice regaining its former strength. "I want answers. I want to know exactly what happened the night of the crash, and I want to know who she really is," he said, his gaze fixed intently on Anna. Anna's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. But Eleanor, ever the master of control, stepped smoothly and deliberately between them, shielding Ethan from Anna's truth. "Don't exhaust yourself with pointless questions, Ethan," she cautioned, her voice soothing but firm. "The doctors warned us that confusion and disorientation would inevitably cloud your thoughts during this recovery period. It's best to just leave the past behind, darling. Focus solely on your recovery. That's all that truly matters right now." But Ethan's voice grew even firmer, his resolve strengthening despite his physical weakness. "I will not be treated like a child, Eleanor," he retorted, his eyes blazing with anger. He turned his gaze back to Anna, his expression intense and demanding. "Anna," he pleaded, his voice laced with urgency, "tell me the truth. Are you truly my wife? Am I losing my mind, or are you someone else entirely?" The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening with unspoken tension. Anna's pulse thundered in her ears, a frantic drumbeat of fear and desperation. She opened her mouth to speak, to finally confess the truth that had been burning a hole in her soul. But Eleanor's sharp voice sliced through the silence like a razor. "Enough!" she snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Ethan is in no state for this kind of interrogation. You're upsetting him, and that's the last thing he needs right now." Anna's hands shook uncontrollably, betraying her inner turmoil. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet Ethan's searching eyes, unable to utter a single word. The silence that followed was an answer in itself, a deafening confirmation of his deepest fears. Ethan's jaw tightened, frustration flashing across his face like a storm cloud. But then, as he looked at her trembling hands, his features softened, a flicker of compassion replacing the anger. "You're hiding something," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else, his voice barely a whisper. "Something big. I can feel it." That night, after Eleanor had finally left, Anna quietly returned to his side, her heart heavy with guilt and remorse. The lamps were dimmed, casting long shadows across the room, and the monitors beeped steadily, a constant reminder of his fragile state. Ethan stirred slightly when she sat down, his brow furrowed in sleep. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, the words barely audible above the hum of the machines. "I can't explain everything right now, Ethan. Not yet. But please, please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt you. Not for a single second." His hand, weak but surprisingly warm, found hers again, his fingers gently intertwining with her own. "Then let me decide for myself," he murmured, his eyes still closed. "Whatever the truth is, I would rather hear it from you than live in this fog of uncertainty and suspicion. I deserve to know who I am, who you are, and what our relationship truly is." Anna's chest ached with the weight of her secret. She desperately wanted to pour out the entire story, to confess that she had been forced into this sham marriage, that she had reluctantly taken her sister's place against her will. But fear, a cold and constricting force, bound her tongue. So instead, she leaned closer, her forehead nearly brushing his, her voice a soft and desperate plea. "One day, Ethan," she whispered, her tears threatening to spill over. "One day I will tell you everything. I promise. Until then, just trust that I am here because I want to be, that I care about you deeply." Ethan closed his eyes, his breathing evening out as sleep pulled him under, offering him a temporary escape from the confusion and pain. Anna stayed by his side, clutching his hand tightly, her own tears falling silently onto the crisp white sheets. She knew the clock was ticking. The elaborate lie could not last forever. And when the truth finally came, she feared it would either shatter what fragile bond they had managed to build or, against all odds, transform it into something real and lasting. Whispers, like insidious vines, traveled faster than truth inside the opulent Blackwell mansion. By the end of the week, members of the board were already murmuring amongst themselves that Ethan's sudden and unexpected recovery would inevitably complicate their carefully laid plans, throwing a wrench into their meticulously crafted schemes. And Eleanor, ever watchful and perceptive, was no longer even attempting to hide her deep-seated distrust of Anna. Her gaze followed Anna like a hawk, filled with suspicion and animosity. One gray morning, Anna entered the formal dining hall to find Eleanor waiting for her, surrounded by several grim-faced board members. A sleek, expensive-looking folder sat ominously on the polished mahogany table between them, a silent threat. Eleanor's smile was thin and brittle, a mere facade of warmth. "Anna, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Please sit down. We have a rather important matter to discuss with you. It concerns your future." Anna's stomach tightened into a knot of anxiety. She sat down slowly, her fingers curling into tight fists against her lap, her knuckles turning white. Eleanor slid the folder across the table, the polished wood gleaming beneath it. "Inside, you will find a revised version of your marriage agreement, dear. Since Ethan's condition has miraculously improved, we must ensure absolute clarity moving forward, for everyone's sake." Anna hesitantly opened the folder, her heart pounding in her chest. The pages were filled with dense clauses and impenetrable legal jargon, but the underlying meaning was crystal clear. Restrictions, limitations, and silences forced upon her, binding her to a life of deception and servitude. If she dared to break the arrangement, everything, including her family's financial survival, would be irrevocably lost. Her voice shook as she managed to choke out the words, You want me to sign this? Even now, when Ethan is awake and fighting to remember who he is, when he's starting to question everything?" One of the board members, a portly man with a severe expression, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "It is a matter of stability, Mrs. Blackwell," he stated flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Investors need reassurance. They need to know that the company is in capable hands and that there will be no disruptions. You, I'm afraid, are still an untested element in this family. We simply cannot afford any scandal, especially now." Anna's pulse raced, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. For the first time, anger, hot and fierce, pushed back against her fear, threatening to erupt. "I am not an element," she retorted, her voice rising in defiance. "I am a person, and he is not just an asset to be managed. He is your son. How can you be so cold and calculating?" The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting, slicing through the oppressive silence of the room. Eleanor's eyes hardened, her gaze turning icy, but she did not raise her voice. Instead, she leaned forward, her tone chillingly calm and controlled. "Do not mistake temporary affection for permanence, Anna," she hissed, her words laced with venom. "You are here because we allowed it. Remember that. If you cannot hold your tongue and behave accordingly, I will personally make sure Ethan knows exactly who you are and what you are not. The truth will come out, and you will be exposed for the fraud that you are." Anna's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding against her ribs. The threat was clear, unambiguous, and utterly terrifying. Eleanor would not hesitate to expose her, to paint her as a manipulative fraud who had stolen her sister's place, destroying any chance of happiness she might have. That night, Anna returned to Ethan's side, her heart heavy with despair. He was sitting up now, propped up by pillows, a book resting in his lap, though his eyes were unfocused, lost in thought. When he noticed her, his lips curved into a faint, tentative smile. "There you are," he said softly. "I was beginning to wonder if you would come back to me tonight." She sat down beside him, trying desperately to mask the inner storm that raged within her, to hide the fear and turmoil that threatened to consume her. "Of course I came back," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I always will, Ethan, no matter what." He studied her intently, his gaze unwavering, searching her eyes for answers. "They think I'm not ready," he said, his voice low and thoughtful, "but I can see it in their faces. They're hiding something from me, something important. And you? Every time I look at you, Anna, I feel both comfort and mystery. It's like I know you, but I also don't know you at all. What are you keeping from me?" Her chest ached with the unbearable weight of her secret. She desperately wanted to tell him everything, to defy Eleanor and the board, to free herself from the suffocating chains of deception that bound her. But fear, the ever-present enemy, silenced her once more. So instead, she reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, and whispered, "Trust me a little longer, please, Ethan. Just a little longer. I promise, everything will be clear soon." Ethan's hand closed weakly around hers, his grip offering a small measure of comfort. His eyes softened, but the question remained, burning silently between them, a palpable force that filled the room. And outside the closed door, footsteps lingered in the hallway, a silent sentinel. Eleanor had been listening, eavesdropping on their conversation, and a cruel, satisfied smile touched her lips. The time to strike, she knew, was drawing near. The moment to unleash her carefully orchestrated plan was at hand. The storm finally broke the night Eleanor made her move, the culmination of weeks of planning and manipulation. A press conference had been meticulously arranged to celebrate Ethan's seemingly miraculous recovery, a carefully staged event designed to project an image of strength and stability. Cameras lined the grand ballroom of the Blackwell estate, their lenses gleaming like hungry eyes. Reporters, eager to capture the miracle of the young heir's return, jostled for position, their notebooks poised to record every word. Anna stood near the edge of the stage, her palms damp with nerves, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent the past few days at Ethan's side, patiently guiding him through halting steps and whispered conversations, desperately trying to forge a genuine connection amidst the web of lies. The bond between them was fragile, delicate as spun glass, but real nonetheless. Now, all of it teetered precariously on the edge of exposure, threatened by the imminent revelation of the truth. When Ethan entered, leaning slightly on a cane but standing tall and proud, the crowd erupted with thunderous applause, a wave of sound that washed over her. Flashes exploded, blinding her momentarily, and microphones were thrust forward, eager to capture his first public words. He offered a small, hesitant smile, then raised his hand, signaling for silence. "I owe my life to the exceptional care I received," he began, his voice strong and clear, "and to the unwavering support of those who believed in me." His gaze flicked to Anna, steady and sure, his eyes filled with gratitude. "To the voice that never left me, even in the darkest depths of my silence." Anna's breath caught in her throat, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. For a fleeting heartbeat, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they could overcome the lies and build a future together. But then Eleanor stepped forward, her pearls gleaming under the bright lights, her presence commanding attention. "Before we continue with the celebrations," she announced smoothly, her voice cutting through the expectant murmur of the crowd, "there is a truth that must be revealed, a matter of utmost importance that cannot be ignored." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes sweeping over the assembled guests. "The woman you see standing beside my son," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain, "is not who she claims to be. She is not his fiancée. She is not the rightful bride. She is merely a replacement, an impostor. She is his fiancée's sister, pushed into a marriage of convenience, a desperate attempt to salvage a family scandal." Gasps rippled through the crowd, a collective intake of breath that filled the ballroom. Cameras swung abruptly toward Anna, their flashes suddenly harsh and unforgiving, exposing her to the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Her legs trembled beneath her, threatening to buckle, as Eleanor's carefully chosen words cut through her like knives, tearing away the fragile facade she had so desperately tried to maintain. Reporters shouted questions, their voices clamoring for answers. "Is this true, Mrs. Blackwell? Did you deceive him? Are you even legally his wife? Is everything we've been told a lie?" Anna's throat closed up, her voice trapped within her. The world blurred around her, the faces in the crowd swirling into a sea of accusation. Her body felt frozen, paralyzed by fear and shame. But then, through the deafening chaos, Ethan's voice broke through, clear and resolute. "Enough!" he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. His gaze, sharp now with newfound clarity, turned to Eleanor, his expression filled with disappointment and anger. "I may not remember everything from before the crash," he said, his voice steady. "But I know this. When I was lost, when I was nothing but silence and darkness, it was Anna who spoke to me. It was Anna who pulled me back from the brink. You can call her a fraud, you can call her an imposter, but I call her my reason for living. She is the woman I love." Anna's tears spilled freely, streaming down her face, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and overwhelming emotion. The crowd erupted again, this time with awe and wonder, not accusation. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every nuance of Ethan's heartfelt declaration, broadcasting it to the world. Eleanor's smile faltered for the first time, her carefully constructed mask of composure beginning to crack. She stepped back, her control slipping, her power waning. Anna looked at Ethan, her voice shaking with emotion, and whispered, "Why would you defend me? Why would you say those things, even now, after everything?" His grip tightened around her hand, his touch offering a sense of security and strength. "Because lies may have brought us here, Anna," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "But truth is what will carry us forward. And my truth is that I love you. I always have, even when I didn't know who you were." The days after the press conference felt like the aftermath of a violent storm, slowly clearing to reveal a landscape transformed. The truth was finally out in the open, and though Eleanor fought fiercely to regain control, her influence had been irrevocably diminished. The board, recognizing the shift in power, could no longer ignore Ethan's authority now that he had returned, stronger and more determined each day. Anna spent those days walking beside him through the sprawling gardens of the estate, helping him take steady steps, each one firmer and more confident than the last. They spoke freely at last, sharing their fears and vulnerabilities, their hopes and dreams. They talked about her sister's betrayal, about the forced marriage, about the web of lies that had nearly destroyed them. For the first time, Anna felt the immense weight lifting from her chest, the burden of her secret finally released. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of golden rose, Ethan stopped beneath the marble archway of the garden, the air filled with the sweet scent of blossoms. He turned to Anna, his eyes clear and bright, his strength fully restored. "Anna," he said, his voice steady and filled with emotion, "our story began in deception, in a world of lies and manipulation. But when I was lost, it was your voice that guided me back to the light. You were never meant to be my bride, yet you became my salvation. I cannot change how it began, but I can choose how it continues." From his pocket, he drew a small velvet box, its dark fabric contrasting sharply with the warm glow of the evening light. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a ring, simple and elegant in its design. It was nothing like the cold, ostentatious jewel that had once bound her to a loveless contract. He opened the box, revealing the ring in all its understated beauty, and offered her a small, heartfelt smile. "This time," he said, his voice filled with tenderness, "there are no contracts, no lies, just truth. Anna Brooks, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, truly and forever?" Tears blurred her vision as she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the moment. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, the metal cool against her skin. And for the first time, the weight on her hand was not a chain, but a promise a symbol of their enduring love. Weeks later, their wedding was held in the very gallery that Ethan had quietly built in her name, a testament to his unwavering belief in her talent and her dreams. Canvases filled the walls, displaying her art, her passion, her very soul come alive in vibrant colors and bold brushstrokes. Friends and strangers alike walked through the gallery, marveling at the beauty and emotion she had poured onto every canvas. Hand in hand, they stood before the crowd, no longer bound by pretense or forced into a life of deception, but united in truth and love. And as they exchanged vows, promising to cherish and support each other for all eternity, Anna knew that the impossible had happened. From lies and silence had grown love and justice, transforming their broken beginnings into a beautiful and enduring future. Their story had begun as a contract, a business transaction. It ended as a promise, a forever.